Welcome to Revenge and Justice, where betrayal finally meets its reckoning. We share powerful first-person stories of men who were underestimated, betrayed, and pushed too far by family business partners and the people they trusted most. If you believe respect must be earned and betrayal always has a price, you've found your home. And now, today's story. For 50 years, I tuned concert pianos. My ear could catch one string gone flat across a crowded room. So on the day we buried my wife, when her billionaire employer called and whispered, "Thatcher, do not let your son-in-law know you are coming," I finally heard it. The one false note in my family's perfect chord. They thought grief had left this old man deaf. They were wrong. My name is Thatcher Barton. I am 70 years old, and for half a century I have listened for a living. If you have ever felt that cold drop in your chest when someone you trusted turns and shows you a face you have never seen before, then stay with me. Hit that like button and tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight. It comforts an old man to know he is not speaking into an empty room. They buried Nellie on a gray Saturday in November under a Savannah sky the color of wet ash. She was 68. We had been married for 44 years. She was the sharpest woman I ever knew, an executive assistant who managed the private accounts of Josiah Payne, the billionaire arts patron whose foundation kept half the concert halls in the South alive. Nellie handled his most delicate business with a steady hand and a locked drawer, and she came home every night and made my coffee, and let it go cold while she scolded me for working too late. 4 days earlier, she had died on Interstate 16. The state trooper told me she drifted across 2 lanes and never touched the brakes. He used the word every family dreads to hear: sleep. He said she must have fallen asleep at the wheel. My Nellie, who rose at 5 every morning of her life, who never once dozed through a sermon or a symphony, had somehow closed her eyes at 60 miles an hour on a clear autumn afternoon. I did not believe it. But grief makes a fool of a man, and I had no proof of anything except the hole where my whole life used to be. So I stood at the edge of her grave in a stiff black suit, holding a single tuning fork in my coat pocket. She had given it to me on our wedding day, a slim bar of polished steel with both our names engraved along the stem. For 44 years I had carried it. When my hands shook, I would press it to my palm and feel the cold weight of it, and somehow the world would settle back into pitch. I pressed it now. My hands would not settle. The minister read from a small worn book, his voice a low drone beneath the hiss of the rain on the canopy. I stood apart from the others, feeling every one of my 70 years pressing down on my shoulders like wet sand. And that was when my phone began to vibrate against my chest. I almost let it ring. Who calls a man at his wife's funeral? But something made me slip it out and glance at the screen. A private number. I lifted it to my ear and turned my face away from the crowd. Thatcher. The voice was low, urgent, and threaded with something I had never once heard from Josiah Payne in 20 years of knowing him. Fear. Thatcher, I am so sorry to call you today of all days, but this cannot wait another hour. Josiah, I whispered, we are burying her. Right now. I am standing over her grave. I know. God forgive me, I know. I heard him breathe sharp and shallow. I have spent the last 3 days going through Nellie's secure files. Something is wrong. Something is very wrong, and it involves your family, and I need you to listen to me very carefully. The rain seemed to grow louder. I turned another few steps away until I could see nothing but the iron fence and the gray line of the river beyond it. What are you talking about? Do not react. Do not let your face change. His voice dropped until it was barely a breath. Is Princeton standing near you? Princeton, my son-in-law, my daughter Madeline's husband, the polished young man in the charcoal suit who had offered to handle every arrangement, who had insisted I not trouble myself with a single detail. I found him in the crowd without moving my head. He stood beside Madeline under a black umbrella, and he was not looking at the grave. He was looking at me. He is here, I said quietly. Then hear me and say nothing. Josiah's words came fast now. Do not tell Princeton what I am about to tell you. Do not tell him anything. Do not sign anything he puts in front of you. And whatever you do, do not let that man know you are coming to see me. You could be in danger, Thatcher. Real danger. Get through this service and then come straight to my office. Come alone." The line went dead. I stood there with the phone cold against my ear, the rain running down the back of my collar, and I felt something shift deep in my chest, the way a piano frame groans when the tension in the strings begins to change. For 50 years, I had trained myself to hear the single wrong string in a wall of sound, and standing at my wife's grave, I heard it at last. Faint and far away and unmistakable, a false note. Somewhere in the perfect chord of my family, someone was playing a lie. I slipped the phone back into my pocket next to the tuning fork, and I made myself breathe slowly. A tuner learns patience before he learns anything else. You cannot rush a string into tune. You turn the pin a hair at a time, and you listen, and you wait, and you turn again. Whatever was wrong here, I would not find it by shouting. I would find it the way I had found everything worth finding in my life. By listening, by waiting, by turning the pin one careful hair at a time. I turned around to face them all. Madeline was weeping into a handkerchief, her shoulders shaking, and the sight of my little girl in such pain cut through everything else for a moment and left me raw. And beside her, Princeton Bishop was watching me with an expression of such tender, practiced concern that for the first time in my life, the sight of my son-in-law's face made the hair rise on the back of my neck. I made my way back across the wet grass, leaning harder on my cane than I truly needed to. Let them see an old man bent low by sorrow. Let them see exactly what they expected to see. It is a strange thing to decide in an instant to hide inside your own weakness. But I had spent my whole life making instruments sound like something they were not quite ready to be. And I found I could do the same with myself. Because Josiah Payne did not frighten easily. In 20 years, I had watched that man stare down bankers and senators without blinking. If something had put fear in his voice, then it was real, and it was close, and it was standing under a black umbrella 12 feet away with his arm around my grieving daughter. The minister closed his book. People began to step forward and lay white roses on the casket, and the soft, hollow sound of each one landing on the polished wood echoed in me like a key struck in an empty hall. I took my turn. I laid my rose down for the woman I had loved for 44 years, and I made her a silent promise over the freezing earth. I would find the false note, and I would not rest until the whole rotten chord came crashing down. The service ended, and the crowd began to loosen and drift the way crowds do, grateful to be released from the weight of another man's grief. But I did not move toward my car. I stayed a moment longer at the graveside, and I let my eyes do the work my ears had taught them to do. A tuner does not look at a piano first. He listens. But when he does finally look, he looks for the small wrong things. The pin that sits a fraction too high, the felt worn thin where a careless hand is struck too often, the tiny fracture in the soundboard that no one notices until the whole instrument begins to fail. I had spent 50 years learning to see those things, and now, standing over my wife's grave, I turned that same patient eye on my own family. Madeline stood a few feet away, and my heart ached at the sight of her. My daughter had her mother's dark hair and her mother's slender hands, and she was crying the way you cry when the ground is genuinely open beneath you. That grief was real. I would have staked my life on it. Whatever was wrong in this family, my little girl was not the source of the false note. She was simply standing too close to it. I thought of her as a girl of 6, sitting on the bench beside me while I worked, pressing the low keys just to feel them rumble up through her small body, laughing every time. I had given her music and a locked shop full of beautiful broken things, and somewhere along the way, I had given her less of myself than she deserved. I had always meant to make that right. I had always believed there would be time. Princeton was another matter entirely. He stood beside her with his arm draped around her shoulders, and to any stranger, he would have looked like the perfect grieving son-in-law. But I was not a stranger, and I was watching him the way I watch an instrument I do not yet trust. His eyes were dry, not merely composed the way a strong man holds himself together at a funeral. Dry, empty. His gaze moved across the thinning crowd with a quick, restless calculation pricing the mourners, marking the important faces, the way a man counts a room he intends to profit from. He was not burying his wife's mother, He was working. Then he leaned down and murmured something in Madeline's ear, and she nodded without hearing him, and I saw his free hand slip into his coat and check his phone. At a funeral. He read whatever was on that screen, and his jaw tightened, and for the briefest instant a shadow of pure irritation crossed his handsome face before the mask of sorrow slid back into place. I filed it away. A single wrong pin. Not proof of anything. But a tuner does not need proof. He needs only to hear the first wrong note, and then he knows where to listen next. I began the slow walk toward the row of black cars, and Princeton peeled away from Madeline and came to me at once, all warmth and solicitude, his hand landing gently on my elbow, as though I might topple without him. "Thatcher," he said, his voice pitched low and kind, "you should not be standing out in this cold. Let me get you to the car. Madeline and I will handle everything from here, I promise you. You should not have to think about a single thing." "You were good to me, son," I said, and I let my voice crack and thin the way an old man's voice is supposed to. I leaned into his arm as though I needed it. "I do not know what I would do without the two of you. You will never have to find out," he said. And there it was, the second wrong note. Because he said it too quickly and too smoothly, and something underneath the words rang hollow, the way a key sounds when the string behind it has already snapped and only the felt is left to answer. I had tuned 10,000 instruments. I knew the sound of a thing that looked whole and was empty inside. My son-in-law was an empty case with a lovely finish. He guided me down the gravel path, and as we walked, I felt his fingers shift against my arm. It was a small thing, a slight deliberate pressure, his hand sliding from my elbow to the front of my coat, patting me once as though in comfort, right over the breast pocket. And I understood in that instant exactly what he was doing. He was feeling for my keys. In my inner pocket, alongside the tuning fork, sat the heavy ring of keys to my workshop on Habersham Street, the shop where I had restored concert grands for half a century. The shop where Nellie kept a small desk in the back and did her quiet work in the evenings and stored the things she did not trust to any other lock. Princeton's fingers brushed the outline of that ring through the wool, and I felt him register the shape of it, and I felt him go still for half a second before he patted me again and smiled. "Almost there," he said gently. My blood ran cold, but I kept my face soft and lost in grieving. Why would my son-in-law want the keys to an old man's piano shop on the day of his mother-in-law's funeral? What did he imagine was waiting for him behind that door? I did not know yet. But Nellie had spent her evenings in that shop for 20 years, and Josiah Payne had called me from across the city to say that something in her files was very, very wrong. Princeton opened the car door and eased me down into the seat with exaggerated care, and as I settled back against the leather, I let my gaze drift one last time across the emptying cemetery. And that was when I saw her. She stood well back from the mourners, half hidden beneath the bare branches of a live oak near the iron fence. A young woman, no more than 25, in a dark coat too fashionable for a graveside. She was not crying. She was watching our little group with a strange, fixed intensity, and there was nothing of grief in her face at all. I had never seen her in my life. For one moment, her eyes met mine across the wet grass. Then Princeton straightened up beside the car, and the young woman turned sharply on her heel and walked away toward the road, her head down, moving fast, the way a person moves when they have suddenly realized they are somewhere they should not be seen. I watched the pale shape of her coat move between the headstones and vanish behind a mausoleum. My mind reached for an explanation, the way a hand reaches for a light switch in a dark room, and found nothing. A mourner from Nellie's office, perhaps. A stranger visiting another grave. But she had not looked at any grave. She had looked only at us, and only at Princeton, and she had run the instant she was seen. I glanced at Princeton. He had gone rigid. He was staring after her, and the color had drained from beneath his tan, and his hand was frozen on the top of the car door. Then he caught me watching, and he laughed a light, easy sound that did not touch his eyes. "Cold out here," he said. "Let us get you home, Thatcher." He shut the door. But I had heard it. Another string plucked somewhere in the dark. And I began very quietly to count them. The drive home was a long silence, broken only by the swish of the wipers. Princeton drove. Madeline sat in the front beside him, with her forehead against the window, and I sat in the back watching the wet gray streets of Savannah slide past, the Spanish moss hanging heavy and dripping from the oaks along Victory Drive. No one spoke of the young woman at the cemetery. No one spoke at all. Our house sat on a quiet lane off Habersham, a narrow old place with a deep porch and green shutters, and behind it, connected by a covered breezeway, stood my workshop. Nellie and I had lived there for 30 years. She had chosen the shutters. She had planted the camellias that were only now in November beginning to bloom along the path, and the sight of them made my throat close. Princeton parked and hurried around to help me out, but the moment my feet touched the ground, he was already moving, already reaching for the door, already ushering me toward the stairs. "You should lie down, Thatcher," he said. "You look exhausted. Madeline will make you something warm. I'm going to step into the back and start sorting through Nellie's papers so the estate lawyers have what they need. It is tedious work. You should not have to touch it." He said it kindly. He said it like a gift, and every word of it was a door closing softly in my face. "That is thoughtful of you," I murmured, and I let Madeline take my arm and lead me up the stairs. She settled me on the edge of my bed and crouched to slip off my wet shoes, and for a moment she was my little girl again, and I nearly reached out and told her everything Josiah had said. But I stopped myself. I did not yet know how close she stood to the false note. And a wrong word now could bring the whole thing down before I understood its shape. "Rest, Daddy," she whispered. She kissed my forehead. Her eyes were swollen and red, and they were honest, and that honesty was the one thing in that house I still trusted. "I will bring you some tea." She left. I heard her go down the stairs. And I heard faint through the old floorboards the sound of Princeton already moving through the back of the house toward Nellie's study. I did not lie down. I waited until I heard Madeline run the water in the kitchen, and then I rose and I moved to my bedroom door, and I opened it without a sound. 50 years of leaning over silent instruments had taught my body how to be quiet. I went down the hall in my socks, keeping to the edges of the boards where the old wood does not groan, until I reached the half-open door of my wife's study. I looked through the gap, and what I saw stopped the breath in my chest. The room had been torn apart. Nellie kept that study like a sanctuary. Every file labeled, every drawer in order, her fountain pens lined up like soldiers on the blotter. Now the drawers hung open and empty. Papers lay strewn across the floor. Whole folders upended her careful order scattered like leaves. And in the center of it, on his knees, was Princeton. He was not sorting anything. He was hunting. He tore through a stack of documents, scanned them, flung them aside. He pulled her banking files from the cabinet and shook them, watching to see if anything fell loose. He was breathing hard, his careful hair falling across his forehead, his handsome face twisted into something raw and ugly and desperate. This was the true face beneath the finish. This was the sound the instrument made when no one was meant to be listening. I had spent my life among quiet, dignified things, among instruments that held generations of music inside their frames. And I had never in 70 years watched a man desecrate a room the way he was desecrating hers. Her reading glasses lay snapped on the floor where he had knelt on them. The little brass clock she wound every Sunday had been swept from the desk and lay face down against the baseboard. He was not simply searching, he was erasing her drawer by drawer, and he did not even know he was doing it. Then he stood, and he turned toward the far wall, and he looked directly at the old upright piano that stood in the corner of Nellie's study. I went very still. It was a battered thing, the piano 100 years old, its case scarred and its finish gone. I had brought it home from the shop years ago, meaning to restore it, and never found the time. Nellie loved it anyway. She used to rest her coffee on its lid while she worked. Princeton stared at it now, and for one long moment I thought he saw something. I thought he knew. But then his lip curled, and he dismissed it with a small shake of his head, the way a man dismisses a piece of junk not worth the effort of moving. Just an old, ruined piano. He turned his back on it and went back to the drawers. A younger man might have looked closer. A patient man might have wondered why a ruined thing had been kept for years in a room where everything else was chosen with such care. But Princeton had no patience for anything that did not shine, and no ear for anything that did not sing on the first strike. He saw only the scarred case and the missing finish, and he moved on. It is a particular kind of blindness to look at the plain surface of a thing and believe you have seen all there is. I had built a whole life on other men's version of that blindness. He had looked straight at it and seen nothing. And I did not yet understand why that small moment mattered so much. But it lodged in me like a splinter, and it would not come out. I must have shifted my weight, because a board beneath me let out a soft complaint. Princeton's head snapped up, and in the same instant, my phone came alive against my chest, buzzing loud in the silence. I lurched back from the door and pressed myself flat against the hallway wall, my heart slamming. Inside the study, I heard Princeton go rigid. "Madeline," he called sharply, "is that you?" I did not breathe. I fumbled the phone from my pocket and silenced it, and I retreated down the hall on the edges of the boards back into my bedroom, and I closed the door and leaned against it. Only then did I lift the phone and look. A private number. I answered it in a whisper. "Josiah." "Thatcher, listen to me." His voice was tight as a wound string. "I've been going through the transfers again. It is worse than I thought. I need you out of that house, not tomorrow, now. Tell them anything. Tell them you need air. Tell them you are going to the pharmacy. I do not care. But get out and come to me, and do not let Princeton see which way you go." "He is tearing apart Nellie's study as we speak," I breathed. "He is looking for something." There was a silence on the line. When Josiah spoke again, his voice had gone very quiet and very cold. "Then he has not found it yet," he said, "which means we still have a chance. Come now, Thatcher, before he does." The line went dead, and down the hall, I heard my wife's study go suddenly completely silent. I did not go to Josiah that night. I could not. To slip out of the house within an hour of the funeral, with Princeton already suspicious and listening at every door, would have been to pluck the loudest string in the room. A tuner learns the difference between the note you want to play and the note the moment will allow. So I stayed. I lay in the dark with my clothes still on, and I listened to my house. For a long time, there were only the low sounds of Princeton and Madeline talking, somewhere below their words, a muffled current through the floor. Then footsteps on the stairs, light ones, Madeline. I heard her pause outside my door, and I rolled onto my side and let my breathing go slow and heavy, the breathing of a sedated old man. The knob turned. A soft wedge of hall light fell across the bed. "Daddy," she whispered. "Are you awake?" I stirred and blinked and let myself surface slowly. "Maddie!" She came in carrying a tray, and on it sat a cup of tea and a thick manila envelope. She set the tray on the nightstand and perched on the edge of the bed, and in the dim light, her face was drawn and gentle and terribly tired. "I brought you some chamomile," she said. "You have not eaten all day. Please, just a little. It will help you sleep." I looked at the cup. Steam curled up from it, and beneath the sweet floral smell, faint but present to a nose that had spent 50 years learning to trust itself, there was something else. A bitter chemical thread that did not belong in any tea. My chest went cold, but I only smiled and reached a trembling hand toward it. "You are a good girl," I said. "You always were. And here's the thing I have to make you understand." She did not know. I watched her face as she handed me that cup, and there was no cunning in it, no calculation, only worry and love and grief. Whatever was in that tea, my daughter believed she was helping me. Someone had told her it would ease my nerves. Someone had put it in her hands and made her the instrument of it, and she carried it up to me as an act of love. That was the cruelest thing I had yet seen in that house. He was not only using me, he was using her against me and letting her believe it was tenderness. I raised the cup to my lips. I let it touch them. I did not drink. And I set it down again with a clumsy old man rattle against the saucer. "What is this?" I asked, nodding at the envelope. Madeline hesitated. "It is nothing to worry about tonight. Princeton says it is just some paperwork for the estate, so he can handle the bills and the funeral home and all of it, and you will not have to. He says you should sign it when you feel up to it. There is no rush." There is always a rush, I thought. When a man tells you, there is none. "Let me see it," I said. "My eyes are tired, but let me at least look." She gave me the envelope with obvious relief, glad, I think, to have done her part gently. I drew out the pages and put on my reading glasses, and I held the fixed stack toward the lamp. And as I read, I kept my face slack and confused, an old man puzzling at words too large for him. Inside, my blood turned to ice. It was not funeral paperwork. It was a durable power of attorney, drawn broad as a river, granting Princeton Bishop complete authority over every account and asset in my name. But it was the clause on the final pages that stopped my heart. A medical directive, language naming Princeton as the sole authority over my care and my competence. Language that would let him, with 2 doctors and a signature, declare me unfit to manage my own affairs and place me wherever he chose. They did not merely want my money. They wanted the power to lock me away as a senile old man the moment I became inconvenient. And they wanted me to sign it myself tonight, half drugged and grateful. I read the clause twice, then a third time, holding the page steady with a hand I would not let shake. Every phrase had been chosen by a man who had already pictured me shuffling down a fluorescent hallway, my keys taken, my name on no account. My voice worth nothing because a paper said so. He had typed it out and handed it to my daughter to carry up the stairs on a tray. Every instinct in my body wanted to rise up out of that bed and roar, to throw the pages in the air and tell my daughter exactly what her husband was. The anger came up in me hot and blinding, and it would have been so easy, so satisfying to let it play. But I heard Josiah's voice. He has not found it yet, which means we still have a chance. If I broke now, I would warn Princeton before I understood the full shape of his crime. I would put my daughter between us with nothing but my word against his. And I would lose whatever it was that Nellie had hidden and he was still so desperate to find. No. A tuner does not swing a hammer at a piano because one string is sour. He tightens the pin a hair at a time, and he waits and he lets the instrument tell him the truth on its own. I had failed to listen once already in my life. For 44 years, Nellie had carried her worries quietly while I bent over some other man's piano, hearing everything except the woman in my own house. I would not fail that way again. If I could not save her, I could at least hear her now, whatever she had tried to leave behind, and I could only do that if I kept my mouth shut and my rage buried. Silence had cost me before. Tonight it might be the only thing that saved us. So I set the pages down on the nightstand and I let my hand tremble and I made my voice small and lost. "It is a lot of words," I said. "I cannot make sense of it tonight, sweetheart. My head is so heavy. Let me look at it in the morning when I am clearer." "Of course, Daddy." Relief again, and something underneath it that might have been shame. She rose and kissed my forehead. "Drink your tea. Try to sleep." "I will." I lied. She turned off the lamp and left, pulling the door softly shut. I lay in the dark and listened to her footsteps fade. Then I rose and I carried the cup to the bathroom and I poured every drop of that tea down the drain and watched it swirl away. They thought I was asleep. They thought I was breaking. They had handed me a cage and called it a kindness, and they were waiting for a frightened old man to lock himself inside it. They were about to learn how patient a man can be when he has spent his whole life listening in the dark. I waited until the house had been silent for 2 hours. The clock on my dresser read a little past 2 in the morning when I finally rose. Down the hall, the guest room door was shut, no light beneath it. Princeton and Madeline were asleep or believed themselves safe enough to sleep, which for my purpose was the same thing. I did not use my cane. I did not need it. I moved through the dark house on the edges of the boards, past the closed study where Princeton's ruins still lay scattered on the floor, down the back stairs and along the covered breezeway to my workshop. The night air was cold and wet and smelled of the river. I let myself in with my key and pulled the door softly closed behind me. I did not turn on the overhead lights. Instead, I crossed to my workbench and switched on the small task lamp I used for close work, angling its narrow beam down so it would not bleed through the windows. And there, in that circle of light, surrounded by the shapes of sleeping instruments, I felt Nellie all around me. This had been her refuge as much as mine. While I worked, she sat at the little desk in the back corner with her ledgers and her fountain pens, doing Josiah's quiet business in the evenings, humming under her breath. She had a way of humming when the numbers troubled her, some old tune with no name, and I had learned over the years to tell her mood by it, the way I told an instrument's health by its overtones. On the good nights, she hummed low and even. On the nights something worried her, The tune climbed and broke and started over. I thought now of the last few weeks before she died, and of how often that broken tune had drifted across the workshop while I bent over my work and told myself it was nothing. I had heard it. I had simply not listened. The desk was still there. I went to it. I knew her hiding places. 44 years of marriage teaches you where a person keeps the things that matter. There was a shallow false bottom in the bottom left drawer, a trick drawer I had built for her myself years ago as a small joke that became a habit. I slid the drawer out and pressed the corner, and the false panel lifted. It was empty. I sat back on the stool, my heart sinking. Whatever she had kept there was gone, and I did not think Nellie had moved it. I thought of Princeton on his knees in her study, tearing through her files, hunting. He had found this. He had found her drawer and taken what was in it. And that was why he had gone still and satisfied at some point in his search. He already had part of it, but not all of it. Josiah had been certain. He has not found it yet. I began to go through the rest of the desk slowly, carefully, the way I would inspect an unfamiliar instrument. I did not yet know what I was looking for. I only trusted that Nellie, who had spent her life keeping careful records, who never left a loose end in 20 years, would not have trusted everything to a single drawer. She was too good for that. She would have left something, somewhere. It took me the better part of an hour. And I found it at last, not in a drawer at all, but tucked inside the pages of the old hymnal she kept on the corner of the desk, the one her mother had given her. A single sheet of paper, folded once. I knew her hand the moment I opened it, and I knew her ink, blue. She had used the same blue-black ink in the same fountain pen for as long as I had known her, and she wrote in it now from beyond the grave. But there were no words on the page, no numbers, no names, nothing I could read. There was a staff, 5 lines drawn quickly by hand, the way she had watched me draw them 10,000 times, and on the staff a short run of notes. A little melody 8 or 9 notes long, scrawled in haste, with no title and no key signature, and no clef that made ordinary sense. Just notes floating on the page in my wife's blue ink. I stared at it. For one cold moment, I thought grief had finally broken my mind, that I was reading meaning into a scrap of nonsense, an idle doodle from a woman who had lived her whole life beside music without ever learning to read it. Because that was the thing. Nellie could not read music. In 44 years, she had never learned. She loved to hear it. She loved to watch me work, but she could no more write a line of notes than I could balance Josiah's books, which meant she had not written these notes as music at all. She had written them for me. She had used the one language she knew I would understand and no one else would bother to read. I could almost see her doing it. Bent over this desk in the late hours, glancing at the door, her pen moving fast across the page, drawing the 5 lines she had watched me draw 1,000 times without ever needing to understand them herself. She would have known exactly how it would look to anyone else. That was the whole point. A locked box invites a crowbar. A line of harmless little notes invites nothing at all. My clever, careful Nellie had hidden the loudest thing in the world inside the quietest, and she had trusted that the one man who could hear it would come looking. Princeton had held her files in his hands and hunted through every number and every name, and he would have looked at a scrap like this and seen a child's doodle, a meaningless scribble, and thrown it aside. Just an old, ruined piano. Just a line of nonsense notes. But I was a tuner, and my wife had left me a melody. I held the page under the lamp, and I looked at those notes, and my hands, which had been so steady all my life, began at last to shake. Not with fear, with the terrible dawning understanding that Nellie had known. In her last days, she had known she was in danger, and she had been too frightened or too careful to write it plain. And so she had reached for the only code in the world that she and I alone could share. She had left me a song to follow, and somewhere at the end of it I knew, with a certainty I could not explain, she had left me the truth about how she died. I did not yet understand what the notes meant, but I understood that they meant something, and that was enough to carry me through to morning. I folded the page and slipped it into my shirt pocket over my heart, beside the tuning fork she had given me on our wedding day. 2 gifts from the same woman 44 years apart. One to steady my hands. One I was beginning to believe to bring a killer down. Outside, the first gray light was touching the workshop windows, and above me in the sleeping house, I heard a floorboard creak. I froze at the sound of the board overhead. For a long moment, I stood perfectly still in the circle of lamplight, the folded page in my pocket, and listened with my whole body the way I listen to a struck note as it fades. One creak, then nothing. A house settling in the cold, or a man crossing a room to the bathroom, or a man standing very still at the top of the stairs, wondering where an old fool had gone. I could not tell which. But no second creak came, and after a while, my heart slowed. I could not go back up yet, not with the melody burning a hole in my shirt pocket. Nellie had left me the end of the song, but a man cannot follow a tune he does not yet understand, and I needed the rest of it. I needed the numbers. Princeton had taken the important files from her drawer, but he had done it in a hurry, in the dark. A greedy man grabbing at what looked valuable, and greedy men are careless. When I turned back to the wreckage of the study in my mind, I remembered the papers scattered across the floor, the ones he had scanned and flung aside as worthless. He had kept what named him. He had discarded what he did not understand. And I had spent 50 years understanding things that other men discarded. I went back through the breezeway and into the house, and quiet as breath into Nellie's ruined study. I gathered the scattered pages from the floor by the thin gray light of dawn, and I carried them back to my workbench and I spread them out beneath the lamp. Bank statements, wire confirmations, internal transfer logs from the Payne Foundation printed in Nellie's neat hand at the top. Pages Princeton had judged useless. I am not a financial man, but I am a man who has spent his life finding the single wrong thing in a field of right ones. A piano has 230 strings, and my whole trade is hearing the one that has drifted a hair out of true, while the other 229 sing sweetly and hide it. I bent over those pages, and I looked for the string that was out of tune. It took me an hour. And I found it. Buried in a long column of routine foundation transfers was a single wire, larger than the rest, moved out of the Payne Foundation's reserve account into an entity I had never heard of. A company called Cavalier Holdings registered somewhere offshore, a name attached to nothing. A shell with no business and no address a man could drive to. $6 million, gone in a single afternoon. Dressed up to look like one more line in a ledger of good works. I checked it against the other statements. I traced the routing forward as far as the pages would let me, and the trail bent back toward home, toward a small business account here in Savannah. And though the final page was missing, I did not need it. I already understood the shape of the thing. Money taken from a foundation that built concert halls and paid for children to learn the violin run through a ghost and steered quietly back toward someone close. Someone who knew the accounts, someone Nellie trusted enough to let near them. I thought of the dinners at our table over the past 2 years, Princeton talking with easy confidence about markets and funds, and the clever ways money could be made to move. Nellie listening with a small, careful smile I had taken for a mother-in-law's fondness. She had not been charmed. She had been studying him. My wife had sat across from that man and measured him the way I measure an instrument brought in by a stranger, quietly, thoroughly, giving nothing away. And somewhere in those long, polite evenings, she had begun to hear the string that was out of true. My hands were steady now. Rage does that to me in the end. It burns off the trembling and leaves something cold and clear behind. I understood the theft. I understood why Princeton had torn her study apart, why he wanted my accounts, why he needed me declared a madman before I could ask a single question. Nellie had found this wire. Nellie, who missed nothing, had seen the one string out of tune, and she had printed the proof, and she had been getting ready to bring it to Josiah. And then I saw the date. It was printed at the top of the wire confirmation, small and gray and ordinary, the way the most terrible things always are. The date the 6 million moved, a Wednesday. The same Wednesday 3 weeks ago that my wife had gotten into her car in the early afternoon to drive to the foundation's office in Macon. The same Wednesday, she never came home. I sat very still. The lamp hummed. Somewhere out on the river, a boat sounded its horn low and long through the fog. The cold of the workshop settled into my hands where they lay flat on the bench on either side of that small gray date. I did not move. I could not. For one long moment there was no thought in me at all, only the date and the two lines meeting in the dark, only the terrible arithmetic assembling itself without my permission. The wire moved at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Nellie left to confront it, and somewhere on the road between our house and Macon, on a clear, dry autumn afternoon, my wife, who woke at 5 every morning of her life, closed her eyes at 60 miles an hour and drifted across 2 lanes and never touched the brakes. The trooper had called it sleep. I had known from the first hour that it was a lie. I had felt it and had no name for it and no proof, only the wrongness of it. The single false note under the whole official story. Now the proof lay under my hands. Nellie had not fallen asleep. Nellie had found $6 million stolen from the man she had served for 20 years, and she had gone to say so, and she had never arrived. A woman does not stumble onto a fortune of hidden money and die by accident the same afternoon. Not in any world where the numbers are honest. I heard myself breathe, in and out. The way you breathe when the ground you have stood on your whole life turns out to be a thin skin over open water. I do not know how long I sat there, long enough for the gray at the windows to lighten by a shade. A moth had died sometime in the night against the glass of the lamp, and I found myself staring at it, the small brown wings gone still, while the horn on the river sounded again and faded. I did not weep. I want you to understand that. Some griefs are too large for the body to answer all at once, and they leave you sitting in a cold room looking at a dead moth, waiting for a feeling that is too big to come through the door. My wife had not died. My wife had been killed. And the man who had done it was asleep upstairs in my house, under my roof, with his arm around my daughter. I folded the wire confirmation once, and I placed it in my shirt pocket, against the melody and the tuning fork. 3 small things, now carrying the whole weight of my life. Then I turned off the lamp, and I sat alone in the gray dawn light of my workshop, among the silent instruments. And I let the truth finish arriving. She had left me a song. I finally understood where it had the lead. I should have gone up to bed. My body was past exhaustion, and dawn was coming, and a wise man would have hidden the pages and slept and let the horror settle into a plan. But I could not leave those files alone. Nellie had found more than a stolen wire. I was sure of it now. A woman does not die for a single number. And there was still the young woman at the cemetery, the pale coat under the live oak, the way Princeton's face had drained white when he saw her. Another string. Plucked in the dark. I had promised myself I would count them all. So I went back through the discarded pages one more time, and this time I did not look for money. I looked for the thing a man hides even more carefully than theft. It was folded into the back of a foundation expense report, 3 sheets that did not belong there, that Nellie had tucked where only a careful reader would find them. Not bank records. Copies. Copies of text messages printed in her neat hand, across the top with a date, and beneath, in a colder hand, I did not recognize. The messages themselves. I did not want to read them. I made myself read them. They were between Princeton and someone saved in his phone under a single initial. The words were what such words always are, tawdry and small and unbearable to a father's eye. Plans to meet. A hotel on Tybee Island. Complaints about a wife who asked too many questions. And a name once careless dropped into the middle of it like a stone into still water. Ember. He had called her Ember. The young woman at the graveside. The pale coat. The girl who had come to watch my wife be buried and had run the moment she was seen. She had a name now, and the name was in my son-in-law's phone, and the messages went back the better part of a year. The better part of a year. I did the arithmetic without wanting to. All those Sunday dinners, Princeton bowing his head while I said grace over the pot roast, Madeline's hand resting on his arm. The two of them talking about the house they meant to buy, the children they meant to have. He had sat at my table with that girl's messages still warm in his pocket. He had kissed my daughter good night and driven out to Tybee. I had watched him across the table 100 times and heard nothing wrong, and it shamed me now, because a man who could not hear this had no business calling himself a listener at all. I set the pages down very carefully, as though they might break, as though I might. So this was the whole of it. Not one betrayal, but two, wound together like strings tuned to the same false pitch. Princeton had been stealing from the foundation, and he had been lying in another woman's bed, and my Nellie had found both. That was what she had carried in the last weeks of her life, the weight I had heard in her broken humming and told myself was nothing. She had learned that the man her daughter loved was a thief and a cheat, and she had been deciding, in her careful and deliberate way, how to break her own child's heart with the truth. She never got the chance. He made sure of it on Interstate 16. And here is what turned my grief to something harder than iron. It was not only the theft he had killed to hide. A thief might have run, might have hidden the money and vanished. But a man who is stealing and cheating, both a man who stands to lose the fortune and the wife, and the whole comfortable life all at once the moment his mother-in-law opens her mouth, that man is cornered. That man kills to keep everything. Nellie had not merely threatened his money, she had threatened to hand my daughter the truth. And rather than lose Madeline's inheritance, and Madeline herself, Princeton had chosen to make my daughter an orphan, and never let her know why. I thought of Madeline upstairs asleep beside him, weeping into her handkerchief at the graveside, while the girl in the pale coat watched from the trees, carrying poisoned tea to her father because her husband asked her to. My little girl was living inside a lie so complete that she had been made to grieve and serve and defend the very man who had murdered her mother and was betraying her in a hotel on Tybee Island. She had told me once, years ago, that she chose Princeton because he made her feel safe. Those were her words, safe. She had grown up in a house full of instruments and quiet, with a father always bent over his work, and she had gone looking for a man who would put her at the center of things, and she believed she had found him. I had been glad of it. I had walked her down the aisle and shaken his hand, and felt the relief of a father who thinks his daughter is settled and protected. I had handed her to him myself. The urge to wake her was almost more than I could bear. To climb those stairs and take her hand and tell her everything, so she would not spend one more hour loving a monster. It rose up in me like a chord struck too hard, and it nearly broke me, but I did not move. I sat in the cold dawn, and I made myself think it through the way Nellie would have, the way a tuner thinks, one careful step at a time. If I told Madeline now, what would I be handing her? My word, a stack of loose pages a clever man could call forgeries, a grieving old father's wild story against the polished, reasonable husband who slept beside her every night. She loved him. She had built her whole life around loving him. Faced with an accusation and no proof she could hold in her hands, she might not believe me. Worse, she might tell him gently to reassure him, and in doing so, she would warn the one man I could not afford to warn. And then Princeton would run, or worse, decide that his father-in-law had grown as inconvenient as his mother-in-law had been. No, I could not protect my daughter by breaking too soon. I could only protect her by finishing this, by building something so solid, so undeniable that when I finally put it in her hands, there would be no room left for doubt. No crack for that man's voice to slip through. She would have to see it whole, all at once, the way you must hear a chord complete before you can know it is out of tune. It was the hardest silence I have ever kept. To know what she was living inside, and to let her go on living inside it a little longer for her own sake. I folded the 3 sheets and added them to the others over my heart. Forgive me, Maddie, I thought. A little while more. Let your old father get this right. Outside, a car door slammed in the gray morning, and I realized the creak I had heard on the stairs an hour ago had not been the house settling at all. The car door had been Princeton leaving. I watched from the workshop window as his sedan backed down the drive and turned toward downtown, and I understood that whatever creak I had heard on the stairs, he had not caught me. If he had found me bent over Nellie's files at 3 in the morning, I would not have been standing at that window. I would have been the next accident on some quiet road. I gave him 10 minutes. Then I dressed and found Madeline in the kitchen, pale and hollow-eyed, over a cup of coffee she was not drinking. Princeton had to go into the office, she said. Something about the estate accounts. He said to tell you to rest. I think I will take a little air instead, I said, and I made my voice frail and vague. Just a drive. Your mother and I used to drive out to the marshes when my head got heavy. I will not be long. She did not want to let me go alone, but she was too tired and too sad to argue, and I was, as far as she knew, only a grieving old man who wanted to look at the water. She kissed my cheek and told me to be careful. I have thought about that kiss many times since. It was the last one she gave me before everything changed. I drove downtown, checking my mirrors the whole way, and I did not go to any marsh. I went to the Payne Foundation on Bull Street, where Nellie had worked for 20 years, and rode the private elevator to the top floor, where Josiah Payne waited with the door locked behind us. He looked 10 years older than he had at the funeral. Josiah was a big man, silver-haired, used to filling a room, but that morning he seemed to have collapsed inward. He gripped my hand in both of his. Thatcher, thank God. Did anyone follow you? No, I said. He left before I did. Josiah, I need to tell you what I found. And I need to tell you what I found, he said. But not alone. Come, there is someone you need to meet. He led me to a smaller room behind his office, and there, at a table covered in laptops and printed statements, sat a woman I had never seen. She was perhaps 45, in a plain gray suit with short dark hair and steady eyes that took my measure in a single, unhurried sweep and gave nothing back. She rose and shook my hand with a dry, firm grip. Mr. Barton, she said, my name is London Stone. I run security for the foundation. Before that, I spent 18 years investigating financial crime, first for the government, then on my own. I am very sorry about your wife. Nellie was the reason I still believe decent people worked in places like this. A small black recorder sat on the table beside her laptop, its red light steady, and she made no attempt to hide it. London Stone recorded every meeting she took and trusted nothing to memory, a habit that had put 3 men in prison and would before long put a fourth. When she looked at Nellie's pages, she looked at them the way I look at a great instrument that has been abused, with a cold and personal anger held very still beneath a professional calm. Josiah hired her 2 years ago, Josiah said, lowering himself into a chair. After a smaller matter, an embezzlement we caught early, I have kept her close ever since. Thatcher, when Nellie died, I did not believe it was an accident any more than you did. She had come to me 8 days before. She told me she thought there was a leak in the foundation accounts, that she needed a little more time to be certain, and that when she would bring me everything. And then she was gone, and her files were a mess, and I could not prove a thing. So I gave it to London. I laid my pages on the table. The wire to Cavalier Holdings, the routing that bent back towards Savannah, the printed messages, Ember. London went through them without a word, her face still turning each page like a surgeon laying out instruments. When she reached the messages, she paused, something flickering behind her eyes, then gone. 6 million, she said at last. Through a shell in the Caymans, back through a domestic line of credit. Your son-in-law did this. I have suspected it for a week, but I could not close the loop because the account it lands in is not in his name. She looked up at me. It is in his mistress's name, a boutique lease and a small business line under one Ember Vance. He kept his own hands clean and put the landing account under the girl. That is why the trail went cold on me. Then we have him, I said. No. London's voice was flat and certain. We have a story. We have pages a good attorney will call speculation forgeries, the ravings of a grieving father. The money is sitting offshore behind a wall of shells. The instant Princeton feels the ground move, he freezes those accounts, converts to something we cannot trace, and vanishes. And the death on Interstate 16, Mr. Barton, the death that matters most, we cannot prove at all. Not yet. A tired woman fell asleep at the wheel. There is no case in that. There is only what you and I believe. The room went quiet. Outside the window, Savannah lay gray and gleaming under the rain. Then, what do we do? I asked. London leaned forward, and for the first time something like a smile touched the corner of her mouth, though it did not warm her at all. We do not chase him, she said. We let him come to us. A man like Princeton has one weakness, and it is the same weakness that made him a thief and a killer in the first place. He cannot stop reaching for more. He has a power of attorney he wants you to sign. He has a fortune he thinks is almost his. So we let him believe he has won. We let him take the last step himself, the one step that puts his hand on the money in a way we can see and record and prove. And when he reaches for it, the floor will not be there. She explained it the way a chess player explains a trap already 3 moves deep. Princeton believed the danger was that someone would discover his theft. The real danger was that he would be allowed to complete it in daylight on a record we controlled with his own credentials. Every safeguard he thought protected him, the shells, the mistress's name on the account, the polished paperwork, would become the rope that bound him, because each one placed his hand more firmly on the crime. We did not need to break his walls. We only needed to let him lock his own door behind himself. I thought of Nellie tightening a pin a hair at a time, waiting for the instrument to tell the truth on its own. I thought of the melody folded over my heart. "You want me to sign it?" I said. "The power of attorney." "I want you to hand him a live wire," London said, "and let him close his own hand around it." I looked at Josiah and at the ex-investigator with her steady eyes, and I understood that I was no longer a grieving old man alone in a house full of lies. I had allies now, and I had a plan. "All right," I said. "Tell me exactly how we let him think he has won." London gave me the tools before I left. She laid them out on the table in a slim gray case, a dozen microphones no larger than shirt buttons, each with its own small transmitter and a tablet that would gather their voices into one place. They did not run through the house network, she explained. They spoke to a private receiver that London would carry, and to a hidden drive locked away in the foundation's basement. Princeton could sweep the house for bugs with the device from any electronics store and find nothing. "You know your own house," London said. "Better than that, you know sound. Put them where a voice will carry. I could do it, but you will do it better, and you will not be seen doing it. That is worth more than my training." She was right, and we both knew it. I had spent 50 years learning where a room keeps its voice. Every space has one, a place where the sound gathers and holds, and a place where it dies. Concert halls are built around it. So are confessions. I drove home in the early afternoon. Madeline's car was gone. A note on the counter in her round hand. Gone with Princeton to meet the estate lawyer back by evening. That was a gift I had not dared hope for. An empty house and hours to work. I began in the kitchen, not because the kitchen mattered most, but because a tuner starts where the light is good and lets his hands settle. I set the first microphone into the shadow beneath the upper cabinet, angled toward the breakfast table where the family gathered, where a man grows careless over coffee. The second I fit behind the books on the living room shelf, its small eye pointed at the sofa where Princeton and Madeline sat in the evenings. I worked slowly, testing each placement in my mind, imagining the path a whispered word would take across the room, the way I imagine a note traveling from a struck string to the far wall of a hall. But it was the study that I gave my whole heart to. Nellie's study still holding the shape of Princeton's greed on its floor. I stood in the doorway a long moment. Then I went in and I set a microphone into the ruined bookshelf and another into the grill of the old iron heating vent near the ceiling, where the metal would carry sound the way a soundboard carries a string. I worked in that room the way I would voice a great piano for a hall kneeling listening, moving a hand's width and listening again. A younger man would have hidden the microphones where they could not be found. I hid them where they could not fail to hear. There is a difference, and it is the whole of my trade. You do not place the ear where it is safe. You place it where the sound comes to die, in the low corner along the hard surface at the mouth of the vent. And then you wait, because a voice like a string always travels to the same places, whether the speaker wills it or not. And when I was done, I turned and looked at the old upright piano in the corner, the battered thing Princeton had dismissed as junk. And I thought of the melody folded over my heart, and I did not touch it. Not yet. Its turn would come. The workshop last. If there was one place Princeton might return to, one place he still believed held whatever he had not yet found, it was the shop where Nellie had kept her desk. I placed 2 microphones there, one above the bench, one near the door, and I stood among my silent instruments and listened to the room breathe. And I felt for the first time since the funeral something close to peace. This was my domain. Here I had spent my whole life making broken things speak true. Now the room itself would speak for me. I hid the tablet under the loose board beneath my bed, the way I had hidden treasures as a boy. Then I sat in my chair by the window, and I waited for my family to come home. They returned a little after 6, and I heard the change in the house at once. There is a sound a home makes when the people in it believe they are winning, a looseness, a carelessness in the footsteps, a warmth in the low voices that has nothing to do with love. I heard it in the way Princeton dropped his keys on the hall table, in the way Madeline laughed once softly at something he said, a tired laugh, but a laugh. My daughter had laughed in that house for the first time since her mother died, and it was her mother's murderer who had made her do it. That laugh did something to me that the theft and the messages had not quite managed. It made the whole thing real in a way numbers never could. My daughter was going to go on laughing in that house, going to lean into that man's shoulder and let him comfort her grief, going to build a future on top of her mother's grave, unless I finished this. Every hour I let pass was an hour she spent loving her mother's killer. I told myself it was for her that I stayed silent. I still believe it was. But I will not pretend the waiting did not cost me something I will never get back. I came down and let them fuss over me. Princeton was expansive, generous, full of plans. The lawyer had been very helpful, he said. Everything was moving smoothly. I only needed to sign the papers when I felt ready. No rush, no pressure. And they would take every burden off my shoulders. I nodded and thanked him and let my hands shake. And I watched him believe every second of it. I ate a little supper I did not taste. I said my good nights. I climbed the stairs like an old man with nothing left, and I closed my door, and I drew the tablet from beneath the board, and I fit the small receiver into my ear. The house came alive in my hand. 6 rooms, 6 small windows of sound laid out in a grid on the glowing screen. I could hear the refrigerator hum in the kitchen. I could hear the old clock in the hall. I turned the volume up until the silence itself had texture, until I could have heard a page turn 3 rooms away. And then from the living room, I heard Princeton's voice low and easy speaking to Madeline. Ordinary words at first, the lawyer, the paperwork. Then Madeline's footsteps going up a door, closing, water running. And Princeton alone and the small sounds of a man taking out his phone, and his voice dropping into something I had not heard from him before. Warm, intimate, a voice for someone who was not my daughter. "She is asleep," he murmured. "No, it is fine. The old man signs this week, and then it is done. All of it. Soon, Ember. I promise." I sat very still in the dark, the receiver warm in my ear, and for the first time in 50 years of listening, I had caught the exact sound I had been waiting for. The false note alone in an empty room, singing itself into my hand. I pressed the button that told the drive in the basement to remember. And I listened on. The confession did not come that night. It came the next. I had learned by then to keep my vigil the way I keep a long tuning patient, and unhurried, letting the hours pass without forcing them. I sat in my dark room with the receiver in my ear, and I listened to the ordinary sounds of my house turning toward sleep. Dishes, the television murmuring, Madeline on the phone with a friend, her voice thin and brave. And then, near midnight, the guest room door and water and my daughter going to bed. And Princeton, restless, moving through the house alone. He went down to the kitchen. I heard the scrape of a chair, the clink of a glass, the neck of a bottle against its rim, and then his phone, and the warm voice again. The voice that was not for my daughter. "She is out," he said. "Took something to sleep. We can talk." A pause while the other voice spoke. "Ember." I could not hear her words, only the shape of them, high and anxious through the little speaker. "Because it is almost done," Princeton said, and there was an edge in him now, the wine loosening something hard and ugly. "One signature. The old fool will sign this week, and then the estate is mine to move, and yours and mine after that. Everything we talked about." Another pause. Then his voice dropped and went cold. And I heard the thing I had waited 3 weeks and a lifetime to hear. "Stop asking me about Nellie," he said. "It is handled. It has been handled since the day it happened. You want to know, fine. You should know what I did for us. She found the Cavalier wire. She found the messages, yours and mine printed them out, all of it. She sat me down in that study of hers, calm as a judge, and she told me she was driving to Macon in the morning to give the whole file to Josiah. And then she was going to Madeline, and then to a lawyer to cut me out of the will. She was going to take all of it. The money, my marriage, everything, in one afternoon. The glass again. A long swallow. So I did not let her have the morning, he said. Her blood pressure pills and my sleeping tablets are the same size, the same color. It took me 4 minutes in the bathroom the night before. She took 2 of them with her coffee at noon, and got in the car at 1. And by the time she reached the interstate, she could not keep her eyes open. That is all. No one looks twice at a tired woman who drifts off the road. The trooper wrote it up before her body was cold. It was clean ember. It was the cleanest thing I have ever done, and I would do it again tomorrow because she left me no other way to keep what is mine. I do not remember the receiver leaving my hand. I found it later on the floor by my chair, the small light still blinking, still faithfully carrying his voice into the empty room. But in that moment, I heard nothing. The house, the rain, the little speaker, all of it went silent, the way a hall goes silent in the half-second after the last chord dies before the applause. When the sound is gone, but the ear still rings with the ghost of it, I sat in that ringing silence and I did not move. A moth, or the ghost of one, tapped once at the window screen and was gone. The radiator in the hall ticked as it cooled. Down in the kitchen, a chair leg dragged on tile, and ice shifted in a glass. Small, ordinary sounds that went on exactly as they had before, as though the world had not just tipped on its axis, as though a woman's whole life had not just been reduced to 4 minutes in a bathroom and a color of pill. I noticed the cold of the floor coming up through my socks. I noticed the smell of the rain. I noticed everything and felt nothing the way you do in the first moment after a wound, before the body understands what has been done to it. Somewhere below me, my wife's killer poured himself another drink. I want to tell you, I wept. A better man might have. But grief that large does not come as tears. It came instead as a great stillness, a cold that started in my chest and spread outward until my hands were ice, and I sat in my chair and I looked at the dark window and I felt myself become something I had never been before. Not a husband, not a father. Something quieter and more final than either. After a long while I stood up. I did not turn on the light. I went down the back stairs on the edges of the boards through the breezeway into my workshop, and I closed the door behind me and I turned on the small lamp over the bench. There was a piano there, a client's instrument, a good old Chickering I had been restoring for a church out on the islands. Its action lay open, half-voiced, the strings bare and waiting. And because I did not know what else to do with my hands, because a man must do something with his hands or lose his mind entirely, I sat down at that bench in the middle of the night and I began to tune it. String by string, pin by pin. I set the fork against the wood and I heard the true note bloom, and I brought each string to meet it one small careful turn at a time, listening, waiting, turning again, the way I had done 10,000 nights of my life. There is a mercy in the work. It asks everything of your ear and nothing of your heart. You cannot think about a dead wife and hear a beating string at the same time, and so for a few hours the string was all there was. My hands did not shake. That was the strange thing. The thing I keep coming back to. All my life, my hands had trembled at small sorrows. And now, at the largest one a man can carry, they were steady as stone on the pins, turning, bringing a dead man's church piano into a truer voice than it had known in 50 years. My face, I am told, when Madeline found me there hours later, was perfectly calm, perfectly still. She thought, she said, that I had simply not been able to sleep. She did not know that I was tuning a stranger's piano in the dark because it was the only thing in the world holding me together, that with every string I brought to true, I was holding at bay a grief and a rage so enormous that I believed honestly they would kill me if I let them all the way in. I tuned that piano until the gray light came, and by the time the last string sang clean and the whole instrument stood in perfect pitch, I was calm, truly calm. The cold had finished its work. I had his voice. I had his confession, every word of it, saved to a drive in a locked basement across the city. I had how and I had why, and I had it in his own mouth, freely given, proud of itself. Now there was only one thing left that I did not have. The truth Nellie herself had tried to leave me, the end of her melody. And I knew at last exactly where in this house she had hidden it. Madeline made me breakfast that morning, and I ate it. I had learned that a man can do almost anything if he treats it as a task with a beginning and an end. I buttered the toast. I answered when she spoke. I watched Princeton across the table, fresh and rested and pleased with himself, reaching for the coffee pot with the same hand that had crushed my wife's pills into powder. And I felt nothing move in my face at all. The cold had made me very good at this. He asked lightly whether I had thought any more about the papers. I told him my head was clear today, and that I thought I would be ready to sign soon. He smiled at his plate. He did not know he had just been handed the first turn of the pin. When they left for the day, I went to work. The pills first. Princeton had told Ember the 2 bottles were the same size and color, that he had made the switch in the bathroom the night before she died. A careful man would have thrown the evidence away weeks ago. But I had listened to that man for 3 days now, and I had learned something about him that he did not know about himself. He was not careful. He was lucky and confident and lazy, and those 3 things wear the mask of care until the day they do not. He had left Nellie's files on the floor because he thought no one could read them. He had dismissed the old piano because he thought it was junk. A man like that does not scrub a medicine cabinet. I went up to our bathroom, mine and Nellie's, that I had not been able to make myself enter since she died. Her things were still there, her lavender soap, her hairbrush, and on the second shelf, the small amber bottle with her name on the label and her blood pressure medication printed beneath it. I did not touch it with my bare hand. I took a clean cloth from the drawer and I lifted the bottle and I shook it gently and I listened. I have shaken 10,000 small things in my life to hear what is inside them. I knew the sound a bottle of the right pills should make. This was not it. The rattle was wrong, the weight was wrong, and when I tipped 2 tablets into the cloth and held them to the light, I saw that they did not match the description on the label at all. He had not even bothered to replace them with the real thing afterward. The killing dose was still sitting on the shelf, waiting for a coroner who had never been asked to look. I stood there a moment with the bottle in the cloth, in the little room that still smelled of her, and I thought about how ordinary it was. Not a knife, not a gun, nothing you would see coming. Just 2 tablets the wrong shade, dropped into a cup of coffee by a smiling man, in a house where she had felt safe. That is how the worst of them do it. Not with violence you can brace against, with a small, quiet change to the things you trust, so that the thing meant to keep you alive is the very thing that takes you down. I sealed the bottle in the plastic bag London had given me for exactly this, and I felt the weight of it in my hand like a small, cold heart. The murder weapon, sitting on a bathroom shelf beside a bar of lavender soap. Then I took out the melody. I unfolded Nellie's page on the kitchen table, and I smoothed it flat, and I made myself read it the way she had meant me to read it. Not as a grieving husband, but as a tuner. 8 notes. No clef that made ordinary sense, because she had not known what a clef was. But she had watched me work for 44 years, and she had drawn what she had seen. Lines, spaces, marks sitting high and low. And then I understood, and the understanding went through me like the first clean note off a plucked string. They were not pitches, they were positions. My Nellie, who could not read a note of music, had drawn me a map in the only shape she knew I would keep, and no one else would read. The 5 lines were not a staff, they were the 5 strings of something. The marks were not notes, they were places. High and low, near and far, a pattern I had seen 10,000 times because it was the pattern of the pins across the top of an instrument. I looked up from the page. And I looked through the kitchen doorway and down the hall toward the study at the corner where the old upright piano stood. The battered 100-year-old thing I had never found time to restore. The junk Princeton had turned his back on. The one instrument in this house I had opened 1,000 times and never once thought to look inside for anything but strings. I crossed the house slowly, the page in one hand and my wedding tuning fork in the other, and I stood before that old piano and my composure finally cracked. Not into rage, into something smaller and harder to bear. I put my hand flat on its scarred lid, the wood Nellie had rested her coffee on 1,000 evenings, and I felt my legs go, and I sat down on the bench in front of it, an old man, alone in a ruined room. And for the length of 3 or 4 breaths, I could not move at all. She had been so afraid. In her last days, she had been so afraid and so alone with it, and she had crept into this room and hidden the truth inside an old piano, and trusted that her husband would hear the one melody she left. And I had not even known she was frightened. I had been in my shop tuning other men's instruments while my wife wrote her last message in blue ink and waited to be murdered. I ran my thumb along the edge of the keys, the ivory worn yellow and smooth, and I could almost feel the warmth of her cup where it used to sit. 44 years, and I had spent so many of them listening to everything except her. I had given the world back its music, concert hall after concert hall, and I had let the one woman who loved me hum her fear across my workshop night after night while I bent over someone else's strings. If there is a sin in my life I cannot set down, it is that one. Not that I failed to save her, that I did not hear her while I still could. I pressed the tuning fork to my palm, the cold steel her gift, both our names along the stem. It steadied me the way it always had. My hands settled. Then I stood and I lifted the front panel of the old piano away, and I looked into its heart, where no one but a man who had spent his life inside these instruments would ever think to look. And there, resting against the soundboard, held in place with a strip of tape in my wife's careful hand, was a small black digital recorder. For a long moment, I only looked at it. A small black recorder, the kind she used to carry to Josiah's meetings, taped to the soundboard of an old piano by a woman who knew she was running out of time. Beside it, folded small and tucked between 2 strings, was a single sheet of paper in her blue ink. My name on the outside, Thatcher. I lifted them both out with hands that had gone very careful, the way you lift something you know you can only touch once. And I sat back down on the bench, and I unfolded her letter first because I was afraid of the recorder, and a coward will always choose the smaller fear. My dear Thatcher, she had written, if you are reading this, then I was right to be afraid, and I am sorry. I did not want to frighten you until I was sure. You always did carry the worries for both of us, and you had carried enough. I read it twice, then a third time, the way I had read the terrible clause in the dark, except that this time the words did not turn me to ice. They did something worse. They warmed me, and a warm thing in a frozen chest hurts more than any cold. She had known. Of course she had known. My Nellie who missed nothing. She had found Princeton's theft and his lies, and she had understood the danger she was in, and she had done the most Nellie thing in the world. She had made a plan. She had gathered her proof, and she had recorded what she could, and she had hidden it where only I would find it, and she had left me a map in the one language we shared. And then she had gone to face him herself alone because that was who she was, and she had not told me because she was protecting me, the same way I was now too late trying to protect our daughter. We were the same, she and I, 2 people who loved by carrying the weight alone, and it had cost us everything. There is a line further down in her letter that I have not been able to read aloud to anyone, not even to Madeline. And I will not repeat all of it here, but she wrote that she was not angry with me for the quiet years. She wrote that she had always known I was listening, in my way, even when I was bent over another man's piano and did not lift my head. She wrote that she had chosen the listener on purpose 44 years ago, and that she had never once regretted it. I do not know if that was true, or if she wrote it to give a grieving man something to hold. It does not matter. It is the kindest thing anyone has ever said to me, and she said it knowing she might be dead before I read it. I set the letter down, and I made myself pick up the recorder, and I pressed the button, because to leave it unheard would have been the last and greatest failure of a man who had spent his whole life refusing to listen when it mattered most. Her voice filled the ruined study. I had not heard it in 3 weeks. I had been so certain I would never hear it again, and there it was, calm and clear and close. The voice that had scolded me about cold coffee and hummed across my workshop for 44 years, speaking now from inside the heart of an old piano. Every tuner knows that an instrument holds the voice of whoever last played it, truly in the way the wood settles in the memory of the strings. I had never believed it was more than a saying, but her voice came up out of that ruined piano, warm and unhurried. And for one impossible moment, the study was not wrecked, and she was not gone. And I was simply an old man sitting in a room with his wife, listening the way I should have listened every night she was alive to listen to. "Thatcher, if you are hearing this," she said, "then you found my little song. I knew you would. You were always the only one who could." I gripped the edge of the bench. I did not breathe. "I have to tell you what I found," she went on, and her voice was steady, but I knew her, and I heard beneath the steadiness the fear she was holding down. The same broken hum I had ignored for weeks. "Princeton has been stealing from Josiah, $6 million, maybe more, and he has been unfaithful to our Madeline for a long time with a young woman named Ember. I have the proof, my love. It is all with Josiah's people, now everything but this. This part is only for you." A pause. A breath. And then the thing that broke me and saved me in the same instant. "I confronted him tonight," she said. "He does not know I recorded it. If anything happens to me, Thatcher, it will not be an accident, no matter what they tell you. Listen to what he says. Listen the way only you can." And then a second voice came into the room. Princeton's. Younger by 3 weeks, careless, not yet a murderer, but already halfway there, arguing with her in that study. And I heard him say the words that would hang him. Not the full confession that would come later in my own trap, but enough. Enough of a man who had been caught and cornered and was beginning to decide what he was willing to do about it. Nellie had caught the first false note herself weeks before I ever heard it, and she had preserved it in the one place her killer would never think to look. The recording ended. The study went quiet. I sat there with my wife's voice still ringing in the air, and something in me that had been frozen since the funeral finally quietly broke open. I wept. At last I wept, an old man, alone in a wrecked room with a recorder in his hands, for the wife I had lost and the years I had spent not listening, and the terrible redeeming truth that she had trusted me even at the end to hear her when it counted. She had not doubted me. Whatever I had failed to hear while she lived, she had believed completely that I would hear this. And I had. It is a strange grace to be forgiven by someone who is gone. But that is what she gave me, taped to a soundboard folded between 2 strings. She gave me her voice, and her trust, and her certainty that the man who had not listened for 44 years would listen now. And in giving me that, she gave me the thing I had needed my whole life and never known how to earn. She let me believe that it was not too late. That listening, even now, even to a voice that could no longer answer, still meant something, still mattered, was perhaps the only thing that had ever truly mattered at all. I wiped my face. I placed the recorder and the letter and the sealed pill bottle together on the bench, 3 small things, and beside them I laid my tuning fork, and I looked at the 4 of them in the gray afternoon light. I had everything now, her proof, his confession, the weapon, and her voice telling me plainly that it was murder, telling me to listen, telling me she had known I would come. There was only one thing left to do. It was time to let Princeton Bishop believe he had won. London and I chose the morning together over the phone, in the language of 2 people setting a trap. The account Princeton meant to move the money into required a notarized power of attorney, and for a transfer of that size, an in-person appearance at the bank with the signed instrument in hand. So the plan was simple. I would sign, he would carry the papers downtown, sure of his victory, and the moment he used them to reach for the money, London's people and the authorities she had quietly briefed would be waiting. He would spring the trap with his own hand. All I had to do was play one last time the frightened old fool he needed me to be. I came down to breakfast on the appointed morning, bent and shuffling my cane, tapping the floor. And I found them waiting. The manila envelope sat in the center of the kitchen table like a thing with a heartbeat. Princeton rose and pulled out my chair, all warmth, and set a cup of coffee before me. I did not drink it. I would never again drink anything that man poured. "Good morning, Thatcher," he said. "You slept?" "A little," I whispered. "My chest has been tight, but my head is clearer today." "Good. He slid the papers toward me and uncapped a heavy silver pen and laid it beside my hand, and his patience, which had held for days, began at last to show its edges. Then let us take care of this so you do not have to worry any more. Just your signature here, and it is done. Madeline and I will handle everything. Madeline stood by the counter, pale, her arms wrapped around herself. She would not quite look at me. She had not been herself for 2 days, and I wondered how much she had begun to sense, standing so close to the false note without yet being able to name it. I picked up the pen. I let my hands shake. And then I set it down again. I would feel better, I said, if Josiah's lawyer looked at it first. Nellie always said I should never sign a paper about money without. Princeton's hand came down flat on the table. Not hard enough to be violence. Hard enough to be a threat. Josiah does not need to be involved in our family's private business, he said, and the warmth was gone, now peeled clean away, and underneath it was the thing I had heard on the recording, cold and final. Thatcher, I have tried to do this gently. I have tried to be kind, but you are not well. You wander the house at night. You imagine things. You forget conversations we had an hour ago. Do you understand what happens if you will not let me help you? I go to a judge. I tell him what I have seen, and the doctor signs a paper, and you do not spend your last years in this house at all. You spend them in a facility in a chair by a window, wondering why your family put you there. Behind him, Madeline made a small sound. Princeton, she said, that is enough. That is your father you are. It is not my father, he snapped without turning. It is your father. And he is throwing away everything your mother built because he is too proud and too addled to sign his own name. And there, at last, in front of my daughter, the mask came all the way off. I watched Madeline see it. I watched the man she had chosen because he made her feel safe show her for one naked second exactly what lived behind his lovely finish. She went white. Her hand rose to her mouth. She did not yet know he was a murderer. But she knew in that moment that she had never truly known him at all, and I saw the first crack open in the wall of her whole life. I knew that crack. I had lived inside my own version of it for a week now, the sick lurch of watching a familiar face turn strange, of understanding that the person you built your days around was never quite the person you thought. For me, it had come all at once on the phone at a graveside. For her, it was coming slowly, the way a soundboard splits a hairline at a time, and I could not spare her any of it. All I could do was make sure that when the whole thing finally gave way, she would have her father standing on the far side of it waiting. I could have ended it then. I could have laid the recorder on the table and shattered him in front of her. But a trap half sprung catches nothing, and Nellie had taught me to wait for the true note. So I did the hardest thing I did in that whole long week. I bowed my head and I let my shoulders shake and I made myself weep. You must understand what it cost. I had spent 50 years earning the respect of people who knew what my ear was worth, conductors, concert artists, men who would not let another living soul touch their instruments. And here I sat, letting the man who murdered my wife believe he had reduced me to a weeping, senile wreck. Letting him feel the warm flush of pity that greedy men mistake for kindness. I have never in my life been so humiliated, and I have never been so proud of a humiliation, because every tear I shed was another turn of the pin, and he could not hear the string tightening beneath his own hand. Please, I whispered, please do not send me away. I will sign, just do not put me in one of those places. This is where Nellie lived. Let me stay where Nellie lived. The change in Princeton was instant. The threat folded back into warm satisfaction, smoothing his features. He had won, and winning made him gentle. Of course, Thatcher, he said softly, sliding the pen back into my hand. Of course you can stay. This is all I wanted. Just sign, and it is over. I signed. My hand trembled, and the signature came out thin and wavering, the hand of a broken old man, surrendering the last of himself. I signed every page he pointed to, and with each one his breathing quickened, and Madeline turned away and would not watch. When it was done, he gathered the papers greedily, tapping them square, sliding them into his leather case. He did not thank me. He did not look at me again. He crossed to Madeline and kissed her cheek and told her he would be back by afternoon, that this was the beginning of everything being all right, and she nodded without lifting her eyes. "Where are you going?" she asked faintly. "The bank," he said. "Just some paperwork for the estate. Nothing to worry about." He walked out into the pale morning, and I heard his car start, and I heard him drive away toward downtown, toward the tall bank on the corner, where London Stone was already waiting with the authorities she had spent 3 days preparing. He believed he was driving to claim a fortune. He was driving into the one room in the world where every wall had learned to listen. I lowered my trembling hands, and very slowly I straightened my back. I did not stay home to wait. London had told me I did not need to be there, that the trap would close whether I watched or not. But I told her I would come, and she did not argue because she understood. A man does not spend 50 years learning to hear the true note only to look away in the moment it finally sounds. Josiah's car took me downtown. I sat in the back with the recorder and the sealed pill bottle, and Nellie's letter in an envelope on my knee and my wedding tuning fork in my closed hand. When we reached the bank, London met me at a side door and led me up through the quiet back corridors to a glass-walled conference room on the executive floor, where a bank officer sat sweating behind a laptop, and 2 people in plain suits stood against the wall who did not need to announce what they were. "He is inside," London said. "He presented the power of attorney 20 minutes ago. He is trying to authorize the transfer of the Cavalier funds right now, with his own credentials on our recorded system. Every keystroke. He has put his own hand on all of it." Her eyes were steady and cold. "The moment he confirms it freezes, and the account he tried to pull from lights up like a city. Mr. Barton, he has already done it. He simply does not know yet." Through the glass in the larger room beyond, I could see him. Princeton, seated at a broad table across from a second officer, Ember, beside him in a pale coat. The 2 of them leaning together, radiant with a victory they believed was theirs. He was tapping his watch, impatient imperial. He had no idea that the floor was already gone from under him. I opened the door and walked in. I did not shuffle. I left the cane in the car. I walked in with my spine straight and my head up, 70 years old and steadier than I had been in weeks, and I watched Princeton's face when he saw me. Confusion first, then the beginning of fear as his mind refused the sight of the broken old man, standing tall in a doorway he had not expected him to darken. "Thatcher," he half rose. "What are you doing here? How did you—" "Sit down," I said. I have a quiet voice. 50 years of listening teaches you that the quietest note carries furthest in a silent hall. He sat. I crossed to the table, and I took the tuning fork from my pocket, and I set it down on the polished wood between us with a small, deliberate click. He looked at it baffled, this slim bar of steel, and then at me. And I picked it up again, and I struck it once against the edge of the table, and I held it up into the silence, and a single pure note rang out through that room, clean and true, the way it had rung on my wedding day and 10,000 days since. "That," I said, "is an A. 440 cycles a second. It does not lie, and it does not change, and it does not care how sure you are of yourself. My whole life, I have brought false things back to true against that note. Today, it is your turn." The note faded slowly, the way it always does, hanging in the air of that glass room, long after the steel had gone still in my hand. Nellie gave me that fork on the morning we married. For 44 years, it had been the one fixed and honest thing I carried, the pitch I measured every crooked, beautiful, broken instrument against. She had given it to me to steady my hands. I do not think she ever imagined I would one day set it ringing across a bank table to steady myself before I brought down the man who killed her. But I think she would have understood. She always understood the things I could only say through sound. Then I set the small recorder on the table, and I pressed the button. His own voice came out of it. The kitchen, the wine, her blood pressure pills, and my sleeping tablets are the same size, the same color. It took me 4 minutes in the bathroom the night before. The words filled the glass room unhurried, proud, damning, exactly as he had spoken them into the dark, and I watched every drop of color leave my son-in-law's face. Ember was the first to break. She shoved back from the table so hard her chair fell. "That is him!" she cried, pointing a shaking hand at the man she had schemed and slept and celebrated with. "That is all him. He told me it was already done. I never touched anything I did not know he was going to. Kill her!" Her voice climbed into something raw and ugly, and she kept backing away as though Princeton had caught fire, and she could still save herself if she got far enough from the flames. Princeton did not look at her. He was staring at the recorder as though he could stop it by will alone. And then he was staring at me, and the mask was gone entirely now, and what was left underneath was small and cornered and afraid. "You cannot prove," he began. "I am not the one proving anything," I said. "You proved it. You proved it into a microphone in my kitchen, and you proved it into your own bank's recorded system 20 minutes ago when you reached for money that was never going to be there. And Nellie proved it 3 weeks ago in her own voice in a place you were too small to think to look." I leaned toward him, and I let him see for the first time exactly what had been standing behind my own lovely finish all week long. "You thought grief had left me deaf. You have no idea what a man can hear when he has spent his whole life listening in the dark." The two plain-suited officers were moving now, unhurried, certain, and behind me in the doorway, I heard a small, broken sound, and I turned, and there was Madeline. She had followed. Of course she had followed. She stood in the doorway with Josiah beside her, and I understood that she had heard the recording, all of it. Her husband's voice describing how he had murdered her mother, and her face was a ruin. "I will see until the day I die." She looked at Princeton. She looked at the girl in the pale coat. She looked at me standing straight and calm where a broken old man should have been. And I watched her whole life come apart in a single, silent moment. And there was nothing in the world I could do to catch the pieces. I had spent the whole week telling myself I was protecting her by keeping silent, building the proof solid so she would not have to choose between her father's word and her husband's. And I had been right, and it had still come to this. My daughter learning in a glass room full of strangers that the man she slept beside had poisoned her mother's coffee. There is no gentle way to hand someone a truth that large. I had only been able to choose the shape of the wound, not spare her the wound itself. And standing there watching her, I understood that catching her, if I could catch her at all, was going to be the work of whatever years I had left. "Maddie," I said softly. But she was already looking away from all of us at the middle distance at the wreckage. It ended quickly, the way these things do once the true note has finally sounded. The two officers did not raise their voices. One of them stepped to Princeton's side and spoke a few quiet words: murder fraud, the reading of his rights, and the sound of the handcuffs closing was the smallest sound in the room. A single soft click. And yet it was the one I had waited 3 weeks and a lifetime to hear. Princeton did not fight. The man who had murdered my wife to keep everything simply sat there while everything was taken, his mouth working, no sound coming out. And then, because a cornered man will always reach for the nearest throat, he turned on the woman beside him. "She knew," he said suddenly, loud, desperate. "Ember knew everything. The account is in her name. Look at the account. It is all in her name. She planned it with me. You said it was handled," Ember screamed back at him. "You said it was an accident. You never told me you poisoned her. I would never have." And they were off. The two of them snarling and clawing at each other with words, each trying to climb over the other to safety. And it was the ugliest and most fitting thing I have ever watched. They had built their future together on my wife's grave, and now, at the end, they turned and tore that future apart with their own hands. Because greed of that kind has no loyalty in it, not even to itself. The officers let them talk. Every word was another nail, and both of them were too frightened to understand they were building each other's coffins. I had spent a career listening to two strings that were meant to sound as one, a unison, two wires tuned to the very same pitch so that together they ring as a single clear tone. When they drift apart, even by a hair, they do not simply sound wrong. They fight. They beat against each other, a wavering, ugly pulse that any ear can hear. That was the sound Princeton and Ember made now. Two false strings that had passed for one, beating against each other at last for all the world to hear. There had never been any music in them. There had only ever been two people using the same lie. and a lie will not hold two people for long. They took Princeton out first. As they walked him past me toward the door, he stopped and he looked at me, and for one moment, the fear in his face rearranged itself into something almost like a plea. He had called me family for 11 years. He had sat at my table. Some animal part of him reached even now for the father-in-law who had always been kind. "Thatcher," he said, "please." I looked at the man who had poisoned my Nellie's coffee and watched her drive away to die, and I felt the last thread of anything I had ever felt for him go quiet and still. "You are not my son," I said. "You were never my son. You are the false note in a good woman's life, and I have spent this whole week doing the only thing I know how to do. I found you, and I brought you to True." I let that settle. "Go, and know that she heard you coming. My Nellie heard you long before I did." They took him away. Ember went after, still shrieking her innocence to anyone who would listen, and then the room was quiet, and it was only us. Josiah with his hand pressed over his mouth, London already closing her laptop, her work done, and Madeline in the doorway, alone, inside a silence I could not reach. She did not come to me. I did not expect her to. What do you say to the father who let you carry poisoned tea to himself, who sat and let your husband threaten him rather than warn you, who built the trap that took your whole life apart in a room full of strangers? He had done it to protect her. She would understand that someday, but not that day. That day, she only looked at me with her mother's eyes wide and wounded, and then Josiah gently took her arm and led her away. And I let her go. Because some things cannot be rushed, not even by a man who has spent his life with patient hands. I went home to an empty house. I did not go inside. I went to the workshop and I let myself in, and I stood among my instruments in the last gray light of that long day. The old upright still stood open in the study across the breezeway, its heart bare where Nellie's recorder had been. But it was the Chickering I went to, the church piano I had tuned through the night of the confession, standing finished and perfect against the wall. And here is the thing I want you to understand, the thing I have not been able to explain to anyone since. I sat down at that piano, and I lifted the lid, and I pressed a key. Middle C. The note I have begun 10,000 tunings with. And nothing happened. No sound came. Because I had in my grief and my fury, the night I heard him confess, done something I have never once done in 50 years of this work. I had left the job unfinished. I had brought every string to pitch and never reconnected the action to the keys. And so I sat there, an old man, alone in a workshop, pressing a silent key on a perfectly tuned piano and hearing nothing at all. I did not fix it. I want you to know that. I could have. It was 10 minutes' work and my hands knew the way. But I sat there in the silence with my finger on that dead key, and I let the silence be what it was, because there are some things a man cannot tune back into song. Nellie was gone. I had brought her killer to justice, and I had heard her voice one last time, and none of it would ever make that piano sing her name again. I had given the world back its music for 50 years. I had made ruined things speak, made silent halls fill, made grand old instruments that everyone had given up on sing again as if they were new. And I could not do the one thing I wanted more than any of it. I could not press a key and hear my wife hum along from her desk in the corner. That was the sound the whole of my trade could not give me back, and it was the only sound I wanted, and the silence under my finger held all of it. I do not know how long I sat there, but at some point I heard the workshop door open behind me. Soft footsteps on the old floor, and the voice small and broken and unbearably young. The voice of my little girl who used to press the low keys just to feel them rumble. "Daddy." I did not turn around right away. I was not ready for her to see my face. I pressed the silent key one more time, and I listened to the nothing it gave back, and then I took my wife's tuning fork from my pocket and closed my hand around it, and I turned to face my daughter in the doorway of the only room that had ever told me the truth. Madeline lives with me now in the house her mother chose. It has been some months. We do not talk about him. We are learning slowly to talk about her. In the evenings, I leave the workshop door open now. Sometimes my daughter comes and sits on the old bench while I work the way she did when she was small, and she does not say much, and neither do I. But she is there. I finally reconnected the action on that church piano. It sings again. And the first thing I played on it with Madeline listening was the little run of notes her mother left me in blue ink. 8 notes. A song with no name. The last thing Nellie ever wrote, and the truest. I used to believe that a man is measured by what he builds and how well it holds. I spent my life bringing broken things to true, and I told myself that was enough. That if I kept the instrument singing, I was doing my part, and the people around me would keep. I was wrong about that. The falsest note in my whole life was the silence I let grow in my own house, the humming I heard from my wife and never once stopped to truly hear. I could not save her. This is not a story where the old man wins. She is still gone, the piano in the corner will never again hold her coffee, and there are mornings I still reach across the bed before I remember. Justice is not the same as healing. I learned the difference the hard way. But I learned something else too, taped to a soundboard folded between 2 strings. I learned that listening is not something you run out of time for. God gave me an ear that could catch 1 string gone flat across a crowded room, and I spent it on pianos, and I thank God that, in the end, it was enough to hear my Nellie when it counted most. She left me her voice, believing I would hear it, and I did. And in hearing it, I understood that it is never, ever too late to start listening to the people you love. Not while they are here, and God willing, in a strange and holy way, not even after. So let me leave you with the question I have carried since that gray Saturday in November. If someone you loved was trying to tell you something quietly in the only language they had, would you hear it? Would you stop and set down your work and truly listen before the silence makes you wish you had? Tell me below. I am listening. I promise you now, I am always listening. And if this story moved you, stay a while, subscribe, and let us keep telling the truth to one another, one quiet note at a time.